The 2026 NFL Draft in Pittsburgh ended, and the fallout started within hours. 8 names, all established NFL players, stepped into the ESPN spotlight and made the kind of announcements that change rosters, shift power dynamics, and rewrite the plans entire franchises had been building for months. The 2026 NFL Draft was held in Pittsburgh, right outside of Criser Stadium, home of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Several 100,000 fans descended on the Steel City to witness their favorite team selecting what may be the missing piece for a Super Bowl title. The stage was massive, the energy was real, and the TV operation was unlike anything the draft had seen before. This year's NFL Draft aired on a record 9 platforms across the ESPN ABC family, including Disney Plus and Hulu. Camera crews positioned themselves at every conceivable angle around the draft stage. Production trucks lined entire city blocks. The NFL had transformed downtown Pittsburgh into a television studio the size of several football fields, and the broadcast ambition reflected a league that understood its draft had become appointment television, rivaling playoff games in terms of viewership. Families gathered around screens. Watch parties erupted in bars across the country. The draft was no longer just a personnel exercise for football obsessives. It had become a cultural event, a 3-day spectacle, where hope and speculation collided with reality. But before the first pick was even announced, the tension behind the scenes was already building. One GM said last week that this was not a great year to have a top 10 pick. Another front office executive called the first half of round 1 uninspiring. The class was deep, but it lacked the kind of generational headliners that make general managers pound the table. There were no Andrew Lucks or Trevor Lawrences in this class. No Saquon Barkley or Myles Garrett types that made scouts salivate from the moment they stepped on a college campus. Instead, the 2026 draft class was characterized by depth without dominant peaks, a collection of solid starters and high-floor prospects, but precious few game changers who could single-handedly alter the trajectory of a franchise. And that uncertainty at the top made every pick more unpredictable, and every post-draft announcement more seismic. When front offices lack consensus on the truly elite talent in a class, desperation sets in. Teams start reaching for need over value. Smokescreens get thicker. Trade negotiations intensify because nobody's entirely sure who they should be targeting anyway. The result is a draft where chaos lurks just beneath the surface of every selection, where one unexpected pick can trigger a cascade of panic moves down the board. The Las Vegas Raiders selected Cal quarterback Fernando Mendoza with the first overall pick. Frankly, this pick could have been made in January, as soon as Mendoza won the national title and entered the draft. That was the one thing almost everyone agreed on. Mendoza's dominance at Cal had been so complete, his performance in the championship game so flawless, that speculation about the first overall pick had ended months before the draft even began. The Raiders needed a franchise quarterback after years of instability at the position, and Mendoza was the safest bet in a draft class filled with question marks everywhere else. After that, the board went sideways. The predictability ended with Mendoza's name being called. What followed was a first round that resembled a game of poker, where everyone was bluffing and nobody could read the other player's hands. Teams zigged when analysts expected them to zag. Reaches happened. Slides began, and the broadcast booth struggled to keep pace with decisions that seemed to defy conventional draft logic. Because of the NFL's new time limit on first-round picks, 8 minutes, the selections were seemingly coming in quicker than either television broadcast was prepared for. The league had implemented this change to speed up what had become an increasingly bloated first-round experience, where teams would milk every second of their allotted time for dramatic effect, even when their decision had been locked in for hours. But the cure proved almost as problematic as the disease. The 8-minute clock forced teams to submit picks faster, sure, but it also compressed the broadcast's ability to tell the story of each selection. Analysis got rushed. Player features got shortened. The ceremony lost some of its gravitas. Picks were also being tipped on social media, and by the time NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell took to the podium to announce a new selection, fans were already 2 to 3 picks ahead of what was being broadcast in real time. Insiders on Twitter were leaking selections the moment teams turned in their cards. Reporters with sources in war rooms were racing to be first with the information. And the TV broadcast, which had spent millions on production value and billions on rights fees, found itself perpetually playing catch-up with people typing on their phones. The fans at home were frustrated. They tuned in for the spectacle, for the moment a player's dream came true in real time. But instead, they were watching a recording of something they'd already seen spoiled on their second screen. The broadcast struggled to keep up. Producers scrambled to adjust. Commentators filled time with speculation about picks that had already been made, but not yet announced on air. And then, as the rounds continued over 3 days, a wave of announcements from established NFL stars started hitting ESPN's airwaves. Announcements that had nothing to do with the prospects walking across the stage in Pittsburgh. First, there was the matter of a quarterback who was supposed to go at the top of this draft, but ended up hearing his name called near the very end. Garrett Nussmeier entered the 2025 season at LSU as one of the projected top picks in the entire class. At about this time last year, when NFL draft analysts put out their way too early mock drafts for 2026, Nussmeier's name appeared early in practically everyone. Scouts loved his arm talent, his poise in the pocket, his ability to make throws that most quarterbacks couldn't even see, let alone execute. He entered last season with the expectation that he'd be selected highly in the first round, potentially even in the top 10 if things broke right. And then the season happened. Nussmeier had an injury-filled final season at LSU. His numbers fell dramatically from 2024, and so did his draft stock. The injuries weren't catastrophic individually, but they were persistent, the kind of nagging ailments that accumulated over the course of a long season and prevented him from ever building the momentum he needed. A shoulder issue here, an ankle problem there, each one costing him a week or forcing him to play compromised. His completion percentage dipped, his yards per attempt dropped. The magic that had made him look like a future NFL star seemed to evaporate under the weight of a struggling offensive line and a receiving corps decimated by its own injury plague. By draft night in Pittsburgh, the unthinkable occurred. The Kansas City Chiefs drafted Nussmeier with the 249th overall pick in the 7th round, just a handful of picks before the end of the draft, from projected top 10 selection to the 7th round, from potential franchise savior to developmental project, from guaranteed millions to a modest signing bonus and a roster spot that wasn't even secure. That is a fall that echoes through your entire life, the kind of plummet that gets replayed in documentary retrospectives and cautionary tales, told to college players about the fragility of draft stock. Then there was Jermod McCoy, the Tennessee cornerback, who was once considered a surefire first-round lock. McCoy had been one of the most dominant defensive backs in college football during his junior year. He had the size, the speed, the instincts, and the tape that made NFL scouts dream about shutdown corners who could eliminate half the field. McCoy suffered an ACL injury in January 2025 that kept him out all last season. The timing couldn't have been worse, right before his final college season, the year when he would have cemented his status as a top 10 pick and potentially challenged for the title of best cornerback in the class. But there are reported concerns about a bone plug in the same knee that was inserted to address a cartilage issue, which may need to be replaced in the future. That replacement, if not successful, would possibly end McCoy's career. The medical red flags weren't just about the ACL repair itself. Those surgeries are so routine now that most players return to full strength. The concern was about the structural integrity of the knee, about whether the cartilage damage represented a deeper problem. NFL team doctors pored over his medical records. They interviewed his surgeons. They studied every MRI image from every angle, and many of them walked away from those consultations with profound doubts about whether McCoy's knee would hold up to the rigors of professional football. Despite strong showings at Tennessee's Pro Day, McCoy seemed to alleviate most concerns regarding his health during the pre-draft process, appearing just as strong and quick as he was before his injury. He ran well, he cut sharply, he looked every bit like the player who had dominated SEC receivers before the injury, but looking healthy during a controlled workout in front of scouts, and actually holding up over a 16-game NFL season with playoff intensity are two different things. And no amount of 40-yard dash times could erase what the medical report said. That wasn't enough to convince evaluators, though, leaving him on the board until the start of day 3. The Raiders eventually traded up and took him at pick 101. Las Vegas, a team that had been aggressive in free agency and was building a roster designed to compete immediately, decided the upside was worth the risk. They gave up future draft capital to move up and grab McCoy in the 3rd round, gambling that his talent would outweigh the medical concerns. A talent who should have been long gone by then, still sitting there because of medical red flags that no front office could ignore. The fact that it took until pick 101 for someone to finally pull the trigger spoke volumes about how seriously teams took the injury concerns. These were the first tremors. Prospects sliding, plans changing, teams pivoting. Nussmeier's fall and McCoy's medical-driven descent down the board set the tone for a draft where nothing went according to the consensus board. But the real shockwaves came from established NFL veterans who used the draft weekend and the massive ESPN audience it draws to make announcements that nobody saw coming. And these 8 stars didn't hold anything back. The NFL is a league built on cycles. Players enter, they perform, they collect their checks, and eventually they walk away. But the timing of when they walk away is what separates an orderly transition from complete organizational chaos. Some retirements happen in February, giving teams months to adjust their roster strategies and draft plans. Others happen after the draft, once a team has already committed its resources and locked in its rookie class. And in the days surrounding the 2026 draft, a cluster of retirements hit the league, like a string of controlled demolitions, each one carefully timed, and each one sending ripple effects through the rosters of teams that were counting on those players. Start with Derek Carr. The longtime quarterback spent years as the face of the Raiders franchise before being shipped to the New Orleans Saints. Carr had been the kind of quarterback who defined an era in Las Vegas. Not always elite, not always able to carry a team to the promised land, but consistent, durable, and professional. He'd thrown for over 35,000 yards as a Raider, made multiple Pro Bowls, and established himself as one of the better quarterbacks of his generation. Even if he never quite reached the upper echelon of the position, and in New Orleans, things never quite clicked the way everyone hoped. The Saints had brought him in with aspirations of reviving their offense after the Drew Brees era had definitively ended. They'd given him weapons. They'd surrounded him with a quality offensive line, but the results were middling at best. The Saints won some games, lost others, and found themselves perpetually stuck in that uncomfortable middle ground, where they were too good to secure a premium draft pick, but not good enough to make any real noise in January. There were initial reports of Derek Carr missing most or all of 2025. He needed shoulder surgery, but rather than undergo that procedure, he has opted to retire. The shoulder had been deteriorating for months, possibly years. Every throw added strain. Every hit accumulated damage. By the end of the 2025 season, Carr was dealing with pain that wouldn't subside even with rest and rehabilitation. The medical recommendation was clear: surgery, followed by months of recovery, followed by an uncertain return to form. Rather than go under the knife with no guarantee that the shoulder would hold up, Carr decided to end it. He was 38 years old. He'd made over $200 million in career earnings. He had a family that wanted him around without chronic pain and cognitive decline. The math was simple, even if the emotional weight of the decision wasn't. Football had given him everything, but football was also taking everything it could from his body, and Carr chose to walk away while he still could. The Saints, who had been stuck in a competitive middle ground for seasons, suddenly had a crater at the most important position on the field. With Carr at the helm, the Saints were condemned to finish anywhere between 6-11 and 9-8 each year. His presence wouldn't allow the team to tank for a quarterback in the 2026 NFL draft class. In a strange way, Carr's retirement freed New Orleans to rebuild properly. They could now commit to a full reset, strip down the roster, accumulate draft capital, and position themselves for one of the premium quarterback prospects in 2027. But it was still a thunderclap. A veteran quarterback, a franchise cornerstone for a decade, choosing his health over one more run. And the timing, right after the draft, meant the Saints had no immediate answer waiting in the wings. Then there was the retirement that made absolutely no sense on paper. Drew Dalman, the Bears' Pro Bowl center, decided to walk away from the game at the astonishing age of 27. Dalman's decision to walk away from football is one of the most surprising moves of the entire offseason thus far. The Bears' offensive lineman is just 27 years old and made the Pro Bowl in 2025 for the first time in his career. He wasn't injury-prone by NFL standards. He hadn't suffered some career-threatening blow. He was, by all accounts, just entering the prime of his career. The years when offensive linemen typically perform at their peak and cash in with massive second contracts. He signed a 3-year, $42 million contract with Chicago last offseason, but is retiring just 1 year into that deal. 27. A freshly minted Pro Bowler with $30+ million still owed to him. And he simply said he was done. No catastrophic injury. No scandal. No personal tragedy forcing him away from the game. Just a man who decided that the toll the game takes on the body was no longer worth it. Regardless of what the bank account said, the decision sent shockwaves through league circles because it represented something the NFL establishment rarely wants to acknowledge: that some players, even successful ones, even young ones, simply decide the physical and mental cost of football outweighs the financial rewards. Dalman had watched teammates struggle with post-career health issues. He'd felt the accumulating damage in his own joints and spine. He'd done the math on what another 5 or 6 years of playing might cost him in terms of quality of life after football, and he'd decided the price was too high. That announcement reverberated through every locker room in the league, because it forced every player with aching joints and foggy mornings to ask themselves a question they usually push to the back of their minds. Is this worth it? For most, the answer is yes, or at least not yet. But Dalman's retirement planted seeds of doubt, reminded everyone that walking away is an option, and that sometimes the healthiest choice is the one that costs you millions in future earnings. For the Bears, the loss was catastrophic from a roster-building perspective. Centers are the quarterbacks of the offensive line, responsible for making pre-snap calls, identifying defensive alignments, and setting protections. Losing a Pro Bowl center a year into his contract meant Chicago had to scramble to replace one of the 5 most important positions on their offense. And they had to do it with a draft class already selected and free agency largely concluded. Terron Armstead, the Dolphins' franchise left tackle, delivered a different kind of farewell. Dolphins OT Terron Armstead retires. Like that previous disaster grade, this one involves an offensive lineman on a Florida team retiring. Armstead had been one of the best blindside protectors in the sport for the better part of a decade, a physical marvel whose combination of size, speed, and technique made him a perennial Pro Bowl candidate. Armstead was the kind of player who made quarterbacks better simply by existing on the roster. Left tackles protect the blind side, the area of vulnerability where quarterbacks can't see pressure coming without turning their back to the rest of the field. A great left tackle buys extra seconds in the pocket, prevents strip sacks, and allows quarterbacks to work through their progressions without constant fear of imminent destruction. Armstead had been providing that security for years, first in New Orleans and then in Miami, but injuries had slowly chipped away at his availability. What had once been Iron Man durability began to crack. He missed games here and there. He played through pain that limited his mobility. The accumulation of a decade's worth of battles with elite pass rushers, repeated collisions with 300-pound men moving at Olympic sprinter speeds, had worn down even his exceptional physical frame. And with Miami looking at a roster in transition, Armstead chose to step away on his own terms, rather than limp through another season. The Dolphins weren't a Super Bowl contender. They were rebuilding their defense, retooling their offense, and evaluating whether their current core could actually win at the highest level. For Armstead, the calculation was straightforward: risk permanent injury for a team that probably wasn't winning a championship anyway, or retire while he could still walk without chronic pain and enjoy the millions he'd already earned. He chose the latter. And then there was Adam Thielen, the undrafted free agent from Minnesota State Mankato, who became one of the most beloved stories in NFL history. The regional combine invitee who turned himself into a 2-time Pro Bowler and a fixture of the Vikings offense for a decade. Thielen retired from the NFL this offseason. Thielen's journey from complete unknown to NFL star was the kind of narrative that sports movies are written around. He wasn't a highly recruited high school prospect. He went to a Division II school. He entered the NFL through a regional combine, essentially a tryout for players who couldn't even get invited to the standard pre-draft events. And from those humble beginnings, he worked his way onto the Vikings roster, then into the rotation, then into the starting lineup, and eventually into Pro Bowls and 1,000-yard seasons. Thielen left the Vikings during the 2025 season in hopes of pursuing a championship. After a decade in Minnesota, he'd accumulated impressive statistics but zero playoff success. The Vikings had been perennial disappointments in January, and Thielen, entering what he knew were the final years of his career, wanted one legitimate shot at a ring. He landed with the Steelers, where he spent the final 5 games of the regular season. Pittsburgh was a contender, stacked on defense and competent enough on offense to make noise in the AFC. Thielen provided veteran presence, reliable hands, and the kind of leadership that championship teams need in their receiver rooms. Thielen announced his retirement after Pittsburgh's elimination in the playoffs, putting an end to his 12-year career. A 2-time Pro Bowler, Thielen played for the Vikings, Panthers, and Steelers and had 64 touchdown catches across 178 games. The Panthers' stint had been brief, a pit stop during the 2024 season when he tried and failed to find the right situation. But it was the Vikings years that defined him. The years when he and Stephon Diggs formed one of the league's most dangerous receiver duos. When he routinely turned impossible catches into viral highlights. When he proved over and over that the pedigree you bring to the NFL matters far less than what you do once you get there. 12 years, 3 organizations, and a farewell that reminded everyone what the word underdog actually means when it's lived out rather than just printed on a t-shirt. Thielen's retirement was celebrated rather than mourned, because he'd done everything possible with the talent he had. He'd squeezed every ounce of production from his body. He'd made more money than anyone from Minnesota State Mankato could have dreamed. And he walked away with his head high and his legacy secure as one of the great feel-good stories in modern NFL history. These 4 retirements collectively removed a starting quarterback, a Pro Bowl center, a franchise left tackle, and a beloved veteran receiver from the league's active rosters, all within the same compressed window surrounding the draft. The simultaneous nature of the announcements created the sense that an entire generation of players was exiting at once. These were productive, respected veterans who'd chosen to walk away while they still had something left in the tank, prioritizing health and family and quality of life over one more season's paycheck. For the Saints, Bears, Dolphins, and Steelers, the draft wasn't just about adding new talent. It was about scrambling to replace the talent that had just walked out the door. And for the millions watching on ESPN, the sight of these players announcing their departures in the same breath as the next generation walking across the stage in Pittsburgh was a stark, sobering contrast. The cycle was laid bare in real time, young players ascending as older ones descended, futures beginning as pasts ended, hope arriving as experience departed. The old guard was exiting, and they weren't doing it quietly. While some stars were saying goodbye to the NFL entirely, others were being shuffled around like chess pieces on a board where neither side could agree on the rules. No situation captured that more vividly than the George Pickens saga. Pickens, the explosive and occasionally volatile wide receiver, had spent 3 seasons in Pittsburgh. And for 3 seasons, the Steelers had tried to figure out how to harness his staggering physical gifts without getting burned by his equally staggering capacity for distraction. Though he was an explosive and productive player for the Steelers on the field, Pickens had a pattern of concerning conduct over his 3 years with the team, and often drew the ire of coaches for his sideline histrionics and costly celebrations. The talent was undeniable. Pickens possessed the kind of ball skills that made defensive coordinators lose sleep. He could go up and get contested catches in traffic. He could separate against man coverage, and he had the speed to threaten vertically down the field. When he was locked in, he was one of the most dangerous receivers in the conference. But when he wasn't locked in, he was a liability. There were the penalties. Against the Bengals in Week 13 last season, he was flagged twice for unsportsmanlike conduct after making big catches. 2 15-yard penalties that turned what should have been drive-extending receptions into drive-killing setbacks. The first penalty came after he stood over a defender and flexed. The second came after he threw the ball at an opposing player in celebration. Both were unnecessary. Both were selfish. Both made his coaches question whether the production was worth the chaos. There was the scuffle with Cleveland's Greg Newsome II, where Pickens engaged in extracurricular activities after the whistle that drew penalties and fines and created bulletin board material for divisional opponents. There was the Christmas Day incident where prior to the Christmas Day game against the Kansas City Chiefs, Pickens arrived at the stadium less than 90 minutes prior to kickoff. For context, most players arrive 3 to 4 hours before kickoff, using that time for treatment, walkthrough, mental preparation, and position meetings. Showing up 90 minutes before the biggest game of the regular season suggested either profound disorganization or profound disinterest, neither of which are qualities championship teams tolerate. The kind of behavior that makes coaches lose sleep and front offices reach for the phone. And reach they did. The Steelers had seen enough. They'd watched Pickens derail promising drives with dumb penalties. They'd watched him pout on the sideline when the ball didn't come his way. They'd watched him create drama in a locker room that prided itself on professionalism and team-first mentality. The decision was made. Move him while his trade value was still high, before the off-field issues completely tanked his market. The post-NFL draft quiet was shattered by one of the more significant trades of the 2025 offseason. The Pittsburgh Steelers agreed to trade talented but mercurial wide receiver George Pickens and a 2027 6th-round pick to the Dallas Cowboys for a 2026 3rd-rounder and a 2027 5th-rounder. The return was modest, essentially swapping late-round picks and acquiring a mid-round selection. But for Pittsburgh, the trade wasn't about maximizing value. It was about removing a problem before it metastasized. The Cowboys saw the upside. Dallas had a history of taking on talented players with checkered pasts, betting that a change of scenery and their organizational culture could straighten them out. They wanted the kind of vertical threat who could stretch the field opposite CeeDee Lamb, and Pickens fit that mold perfectly. Pickens ran a 4.47 40 at the NFL Combine in 2022, and he led the NFL in yards per catch in 2023 at 18.1. That speed and production combination made him exactly the kind of deep threat that could open up the entire Cowboys offense, creating space underneath for Lamb to operate and forcing safeties to respect the vertical dimension. Dallas envisioned a scenario where Pickens' physical gifts flourished in their offensive system, while their veteran leadership and strong locker room culture kept his behavioral issues in check. It was a calculated gamble. The Cowboys were giving up draft capital for a player whose talent ceiling was elite, but whose floor was unplayable distraction. The bet was that the ceiling would manifest more often than the floor. For the first half of the 2025 season, it looked like the bet might pay off. Pickens produced in Dallas. He stretched the field. He made big plays. But the behavioral red flags that Pittsburgh had warned about started surfacing again. The body language issues, the penalties, the sense that Pickens was more interested in his individual statistics than team success. The Cowboys' coaching staff found themselves managing the same issues the Steelers had dealt with, trying to maximize a rare talent while minimizing the collateral damage that talent created. But here's where the drama escalated into the post-draft earthquake zone. After less than a full season in Dallas, the Cowboys made their position crystal clear during draft weekend. Jerry and Stephen Jones told media that they are no longer negotiating a long-term contract with George Pickens. The Cowboys will have him play under the franchise tag this season. And Stephen Jones said it was mainly because of the fact he's only played one season in Dallas so far. And the Cowboys are also paying top-of-market money to Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. That announcement, delivered casually to the media while the draft was still underway, was anything but casual for Pickens. The franchise tag is a one-year, fully guaranteed contract that pays players the average of the top 5 salaries at their position. For a wide receiver, that meant roughly $25 million for the 2026 season. Good money. Absolutely. But it's also one-year money. There's no security beyond this season. No guaranteed money in future years. No long-term commitment that protects against injury or decline. Playing on the franchise tag means he collects that one-year, fully guaranteed salary. But it also means he has zero long-term security. Every snap is a risk. Every hit carries the possibility of a career-altering injury that would wipe out future earnings. And for a player who clearly wanted to establish himself as a centerpiece of an offense, being told to prove it for another year before getting paid had to sting. The subtext of Dallas's announcement was clear. We're not convinced you're worth the long-term investment yet. Show us a full season of production without the drama, and maybe we'll reconsider. For Pickens, the message had to be humbling. He'd been traded once already because a team decided he wasn't worth the headache. Now his new team was telling him he hadn't earned their trust either. The franchise tag announcement was a shot across the bow, a reminder that talent alone doesn't guarantee security, and that the Cowboys held all the leverage. The Cowboys, meanwhile, were making it abundantly clear through their draft picks that they were focused on reshaping the defense. Through 2 days of the NFL draft, the Cowboys have drafted 3 new defenders and traded for another to add to Christian Parker's defense. Dallas is confident in their new faces, with owner GM Jerry Jones saying, "We've changed this defense." The defensive focus was a direct response to the Cowboys' playoff failures in recent years, where elite offenses had routinely shredded their secondary and made their pass rush ineffective. They swapped picks with the Eagles, a division rival, in a move that raised eyebrows across the entire NFC East. Trading with a team you play twice a year is always risky. You're potentially helping an opponent improve while also trying to improve yourself. The optics of doing business with Philadelphia, especially after the Eagles had knocked Dallas out of playoff contention multiple times in recent years, made the trade even more controversial among Cowboys fans, who wanted their team to treat divisional rivals as enemies rather than trade partners. They brought in Malachi Lawrence from UCF for the pass rush, a developmental edge rusher with elite athletic traits, who could eventually develop into a double-digit sack guy. They selected safety Caleb Downs from Ohio State to anchor the secondary, a rangy playmaker who could cover ground in deep zones and make plays on the ball. And they added linebacker Jashawn Barham to bring physicality to a linebacking core that had been criticized for being too soft against the run. The message was unmistakable. Dallas was investing its draft capital in stopping people, not paying the people who catch the ball. The franchise had decided that their offensive talent was sufficient. Prescott at quarterback, Lamb at receiver, a strong offensive line, a capable running game. Where they'd fallen short was on defense, and the draft was their opportunity to address those deficiencies. Pickens factored into the offensive equation, but only as a complementary piece, not as a cornerstone worth breaking the bank for. For Pickens, the implication was clear. He's in Dallas, he'll play, but he's playing for his next contract, and the Cowboys aren't making any promises. The franchise tag announcement on ESPN, delivered while prospects were still getting their names called, was a power move by Dallas. A public declaration that they had options and Pickens needed them more than they needed him. And it was a cold reminder that in the NFL, talent alone doesn't guarantee loyalty. Chemistry matters, reliability matters, trustworthiness matters. And Pickens, despite his physical gifts, hadn't proven those qualities sufficiently to earn the long-term commitment he wanted on the Pittsburgh side of the equation. In trading away Pickens, the Steelers are back to having just one top wide receiver on the roster. They had acquired DK Metcalf from Seattle in a blockbuster trade earlier in the offseason, landing one of the league's premier deep threats and giving their quarterback, whoever that ended up being, a genuine #1 receiver. But losing Pickens meant the receiver room had thinned dramatically beyond Metcalf. There was no proven #2 option. The depth chart was filled with unproven young players and journeyman veterans, none of whom inspired confidence as reliable offensive weapons. And the move had deeper implications too, because the Steelers were still waiting to hear from one very important person about whether he would even show up to throw the football in 2026. The Pickens trade made sense if Aaron Rodgers was coming. It made less sense if the Steelers were going to be rolling out a young, inexperienced quarterback who needed as many weapons as possible to mask his limitations. But we'll get to him. The Pickens situation exemplified the modern NFL star player dynamic. Teams want the production without the complications. They want the talent without the tantrums. And when a player demonstrates that the complications outweigh the production, or even that the margin between the two is too narrow, teams move on. Pittsburgh moved on. Dallas brought him in, but refused to commit long-term, and Pickens found himself in the uncomfortable position of being recognized as talented, but not trusted, valued, but not essential, wanted, but not indispensable. If the Pickens situation was a controlled burn, the A.J. Brown saga was a 5-alarm fire that everyone could see coming, but nobody could put out. Brown, the 3-time All-Pro wide receiver, had become one of the most dominant pass catchers of his generation during his time in Philadelphia. He was the kind of player who made Jalen Hurts a more dangerous quarterback, simply by existing on the field. Brown's combination of size, speed, route running precision, and competitive fire made him nearly impossible to defend one-on-one, and his presence forced defenses to shade coverage his direction, which opened up opportunities for every other skill player in the Eagles' offense. But by the spring of 2026, the relationship between Brown and the Eagles had deteriorated beyond repair. What had started as a marriage of mutual benefit, Philadelphia getting an elite receiver, Brown getting paid, and playing for a contender, had curdled into something toxic. The exact catalyst was never publicly confirmed, but the signs were everywhere. Brown's social media activity became passive-aggressive. His interview answers grew terse, and when the Eagles' voluntary off-season program began, Brown was conspicuously absent. The Philadelphia Eagles are expected to be without wide receiver A.J. Brown for voluntary off-season workouts. A trade is likelier than ever, according to Yahoo Sports' Charles Robinson, but it's still unlikely to happen before June 1, due to the salary cap gymnastics involved. Brown wasn't showing up. Not to workouts, not to team functions, not to the informal throwing sessions that quarterback and receivers use to build chemistry during the offseason. His absence was a message, and the message was clear. I don't want to be here anymore. The Eagles weren't hiding the fact that they were planning for life without him. General manager Howie Roseman, one of the shrewdest executives in football, had already begun maneuvering to find Brown's replacement. And then, on draft night, Philadelphia made the loudest statement they could possibly make. They got aggressive in the first round to land an offensive playmaker that will immediately improve the explosiveness of their unit. After trading up from 23 to 20, the Eagles selected USC wide receiver Makai Lemon. The Eagles traded up in the first round, with the Dallas Cowboys no less, to select the reigning Biletnikoff Award winner. Trading up costs draft capital. Trading up within your division costs pride. But Roseman didn't hesitate, because he knew exactly what he was getting. Lemon, 21, now headed to Philadelphia after winning the Fred Biletnikoff Award in 2025. As the nation's top wide receiver, Lemon was an All-American for the Trojans last year, catching 79 passes for 1,156 yards and 11 touchdowns. He wasn't just productive, he was dominant. He ran routes with polish that most college receivers don't develop until they're in the NFL. He created separation effortlessly. He caught everything thrown his way, and he had the speed to take short passes and turn them into long touchdowns, the kind of game-breaking ability that makes offensive coordinators salivate. The message to Brown was as subtle as a sledgehammer through a glass table. "We found your replacement. We're investing first-round capital in him. Your time here is over." The Eagles weren't negotiating anymore. They weren't trying to salvage the relationship. They'd made their decision, and they'd made it publicly on one of the biggest stages the NFL provides. The draft selection was Philadelphia's way of telling Brown and the rest of the league that they were moving on, with or without his cooperation. And if there was any doubt about where Brown would end up, Adam Schefter delivered the news that obliterated whatever remaining ambiguity existed. Adam Schefter reports that the Eagles are likely to deal A.J. Brown to the Patriots after June 1st. New England. The Patriots, a franchise in the early stages of a rebuild, looking for a veteran weapon to anchor their receiving core. The deal was trending toward completion, with the June 1st designation allowing Philadelphia to spread the dead cap hit across 2 seasons and make the financial math work. The June 1st designation is crucial in NFL trades involving expensive veterans. When a team trades or releases a player before June 1st, the entire remaining dead money on that player's contract accelerates into the current year's salary cap. But if they wait until after June 1, they can spread that dead money across 2 years, giving them more cap flexibility in the immediate term. For the Eagles, trading Brown before June 1 would have created a cap catastrophe. Waiting until after June 1 allowed them to manage the financial hit while still getting him off the roster. The Eagles still currently have the disgruntled 3-time NFL All-Pro Brown on their roster, but they are widely expected to trade Brown to one top AFC team after June 1. With the timing due to the nature of Brown's contract and the associated cap hit, the specifics of what Philadelphia would receive in return hadn't been finalized. But league sources indicated the package would likely include a second-round pick and potentially additional mid-round selections or young players. Not a king's ransom, but fair value for an elite receiver with attitude concerns, who was about to count heavily against the cap. For Brown, this wasn't just a change of scenery. This was a statement about how quickly the NFL moves on from even its biggest stars. When the relationship fractures, a player who had been central to Philadelphia's Super Bowl hopes just 2 years earlier was now being shipped to Foxborough, a place where the winters are longer, the expectations are different, and the rebuild has only just begun. New England wasn't competing for championships. They were stockpiling young talent, developing their quarterback, and hoping to return to relevance within the next few years. Brown would be their veteran presence, their proven commodity, in a receiver room full of question marks. For the Eagles, the calculus was straightforward. This move makes plenty of sense when you consider that the Eagles are in a winning window and want to provide QB Jalen Hurts with as many offensive weapons as possible. They weren't losing faith in their ability to compete. They had a franchise quarterback in Hurts, an elite offensive line, a strong running game, and a defense that was getting better. What they couldn't afford was a star receiver who didn't want to be there, creating a toxic environment that could poison an otherwise healthy locker room. They were simply reshuffling the deck, swapping an aging star with a deteriorating attitude for a young, hungry first-round pick who still had everything to prove. Makai Lemon was cheaper. His rookie contract would pay him a fraction of what Brown was making. He was more controllable. The Eagles would have him under team control for 4 years, with a 5th-year option available. And critically, he was actually willing to show up for off-season workouts, something Brown had made clear he had no intention of doing. The Jonathan Greenard trade added another layer to the Eagles' draft weekend maneuvering. The Philadelphia Eagles traded for Vikings edge rusher Jonathan Greenard in a blockbuster deal during Day 2 of the 2026 NFL Draft. Greenard had been one of the league's most productive pass rushers over the previous 2 seasons, recording double-digit sacks in consecutive years and establishing himself as a game wrecker off the edge. Minnesota, in rebuilding mode, was willing to move him for the right price, and Philadelphia was willing to pay it. Howie Roseman, Philadelphia's general manager, was playing chess at a speed that made other front offices look like they were stuck in traffic. The Greenard acquisition shored up the defense, adding an elite edge rusher to a unit that already had strength in the secondary and linebackers. The Lemon selection replaced Brown's production on offense. 2 massive moves, both executed during the draft, both signaling that the Eagles were all in on their championship window. With or without A.J. Brown, the Greenard trade cost the Eagles a 3rd-round pick and a future mid-round selection, but it was worth it to add that caliber of pass rusher. In the modern NFL, quarterbacks win games, but edge rushers determine playoff outcomes. The ability to pressure the quarterback without blitzing extra defenders is the most valuable skill in football, and Greenard provided exactly that. Philadelphia was betting that the combination of Greenard terrorizing opposing quarterbacks and Lemon replacing Brown's production would make them better overall, even if they were technically downgrading at the receiver position. That announcement, the one confirming Brown's imminent departure, hit the ESPN airwaves like a thunderclap. Fans in Philadelphia felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Brown had been beloved in the city, celebrated for his toughness, his production, and his ability to deliver in big moments. But the love affair had ended, and the divorce was being finalized on national television during the draft. Social media erupted with reactions ranging from devastation to grudging acceptance, to outright anger at Brown for forcing the situation in the first place. And fans in New England started to wonder whether the franchise was finally turning a corner. The Patriots had been lost in the wilderness since Tom Brady's departure, cycling through quarterbacks and coaches and front office structures, while failing to recapture even a fraction of their dynasty-era success. But adding a 3-time All-Pro receiver suggested they were serious about competing again, about building something sustainable rather than just collecting draft picks and hoping for the best. Either way, A.J. Brown's chapter in Philadelphia was closing. The Eagles had drafted his replacement, finalized his trade destination, and moved on emotionally even if the transaction hadn't been processed yet. And the entire NFL knew it before the draft. Confetti had even been swept off the stage in Pittsburgh. The Brown situation became the defining storyline of the draft weekend, a reminder that the league's business side never sleeps, that relationships fracture faster than they're built, and that even all-pro talents get moved when the fit breaks down. The quarterbacks who won't answer. The retirements rocked the league. The trades reshaped rosters. The franchise tag put Pickens on notice. And the Brown trade signaled a changing of the guard in Philadelphia. But the single most dramatic storyline of the entire post-draft period centered on one man who still hasn't made a decision, and another who might be walking away from the game for good. These were the quarterback situations that dominated the post-draft news cycle. The stories that overshadowed even the rookies who just had their names called. Aaron Rodgers. The name alone carries enough narrative weight to fill an entire offseason news cycle. 4-time MVP. Super Bowl champion, future Hall of Famer, one of the most talented quarterbacks in NFL history, and also one of the most enigmatic, stubborn, and frustrating to deal with from an organizational standpoint. And in the spring of 2026, Rodgers had the Pittsburgh Steelers in an extraordinarily uncomfortable position. The Pittsburgh Steelers opened a 3-day voluntary minicamp under new head coach Mike McCarthy, and did so without any indication from quarterback Aaron Rodgers regarding his status for this season. Rodgers has not informed the Steelers on whether he intends to play for them in 2026, and thus sign a new contract, according to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero. The Steelers had acquired Rodgers in a trade with the Jets earlier in the offseason, giving up significant draft capital to land the future Hall of Fame quarterback. The move signaled that Pittsburgh believed they were a quarterback away from being a legitimate Super Bowl contender, and that status wasn't likely to change before the NFL draft. As a result, 2025 6th-round pick Will Howard got the starter's work at quarterback. Howard, a developmental prospect from Ohio State, had spent his rookie season learning the system and getting occasional reps in practice. He wasn't ready to start in the NFL. Everyone knew that, including the Steelers' coaching staff. But with Rodgers refusing to commit one way or the other, Howard was getting first-team reps by default, simply because someone had to take the snaps during organized team activities. This wasn't the first time Rodgers had left a team twisting in the wind during an offseason. In an eerily similar offseason to 2025, the Steelers continued to wait on Aaron Rodgers. This time, however, the team did not seem to expect the process to drag on like it has. Steelers general manager Omar Khan was direct when the 2026 offseason began, saying they did not anticipate Rodgers' decision taking this long. The implication was clear: Pittsburgh had traded for Rodgers, with the understanding that he was prepared to play. The indecision was unexpected and unwelcome, but Rodgers operates on his own timeline. He'd spent the early part of the offseason on a darkness retreat, a meditation practice where participants spend days in complete darkness to achieve mental clarity. He dropped cryptic hints on podcasts about whether he still had the fire to compete. He talked about alternative medicine treatments and holistic approaches to healing his body, none of which provided any concrete answers about whether he'd be under center for the Steelers in Week 1. The Steelers had made significant moves to build a roster capable of competing for a championship. They traded for DK Metcalf, landing one of the NFL's premier deep threats. To give Rodgers a vertical weapon, they signed veteran cornerback Darius Slay to shore up the secondary. They retained their elite defensive core, TJ Watt, Cameron Hayward, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and added complementary pieces through free agency. Those moves pointed to a team that felt like it was a quarterback away from being a legitimate Super Bowl threat. It still seems like Rodgers will end up in Pittsburgh. League sources suggested that Rodgers was leaning toward playing, that the indecision was more about contract negotiations and his preparation timeline than genuine doubt about returning. But seems like and is confirmed are very different things. When you're trying to build a football team, the Steelers needed to know. They needed to plan their offense. They needed to finalize their depth chart. They needed to build chemistry between the quarterback and the receivers. And Rodgers' silence was making all of that impossible. So the Steelers hedged their bets. On day 2 of the draft, they made their move. The Pittsburgh Steelers selected Penn State quarterback Drew Aller with the number 76 overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft on Friday night. Now, Aller enters a depth chart with second-year quarterback Will Howard and veteran Mason Rudolph. Aaron Rodgers is likely to return for 2026, but he has not made an official decision as of the draft. Aller had been one of the most talked-about quarterback prospects in college football for years. He'd enrolled at Penn State as a 5-star recruit with all the physical tools, size, arm strength, mobility, intelligence that scouts dream about. But his college career had been solid rather than spectacular. He'd been productive without being dominant, efficient without being elite. That combination of immense physical potential and merely good college production made him a polarizing prospect. Some scouts saw a future franchise quarterback who just needed better coaching and weapons. Others saw a player whose ceiling might be quality backup. That pick was the loudest possible signal Pittsburgh could send. They weren't going to sit around and wait forever for Rodgers to make up his mind. They were building their quarterback depth chart with or without the 4-time MVP. And the fact that they used a 3rd-round pick, not a late-round flyer, but a genuine investment, told everyone watching that the Steelers were preparing for the very real possibility that Rodgers might simply decide not to play football anymore. The LR selection created fascinating dynamics. If Rodgers returned, Aller would spend his rookie year learning from one of the greatest quarterbacks in history, studying the nuances of the position from a master of the craft. If Rodgers walked away, Aller would be thrust into a competition with Will Howard for the starting job, a scenario that the Steelers desperately wanted to avoid, but had to prepare for nonetheless. Either way, Pittsburgh had secured insurance against the Rodgers uncertainty. Meanwhile, on the opposite coast, another veteran quarterback was staring down the same existential fork in the road. Jimmy Garoppolo may be calling it a career. The longtime backup turned starter, turned backup again, had spent the 2025 season with the Los Angeles Rams, operating as Matthew Stafford's insurance policy. Garoppolo had been the backup in New England behind Tom Brady for years, before getting his shot as a starter in San Francisco. He'd led the 49ers to a Super Bowl, signed a massive contract, and then watched his starting job get usurped by a rookie who was cheaper, younger, and healthier. Rams head coach Sean McVay and general manager Les Snead discussed the latest on backup quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo, who is weighing retirement. The belief was that Garoppolo would have interest around the NFL as a backup, but the fact that he's contemplating retirement would certainly explain why he hasn't settled on a team. Garoppolo was only 34 years old, young enough to continue playing if he wanted to. But he'd made over $100 million in career earnings. He'd been to a Super Bowl. He'd proven he could win games at the NFL level. And perhaps most importantly, he'd watched enough former quarterbacks struggle with post-career health issues to understand what continuing to play might cost him. The Rams, unwilling to be caught without a succession plan, selected Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson with the 13th overall pick in the first round. Simpson was one of the most debated quarterback prospects in the class, a player whose tape showed elite arm talent and decision-making, but whose college production had been merely good rather than great. Simpson had played in Alabama's pro-style offense, which should have translated well to the NFL. He'd made the throws that NFL quarterbacks need to make. He'd operated under center, called protections, worked through progressions, but he'd also benefited from playing with superior talent at every position, which made it difficult to evaluate whether his success was due to his own ability or the dominance of the players around him. The Rams grabbing him that high was a clear acknowledgement that the Stafford era, while not yet over, was approaching its final chapters. With Garoppolo potentially walking away and Stafford turning 38, Los Angeles needed a long-term answer. Stafford was still playing at a high level, still capable of carrying an offense, still mentally sharp enough to read defenses and make the throws required to win games. But age is undefeated in the NFL. Stafford's body was accumulating wear. His arm strength, while still good, wasn't what it had been 5 years earlier. The Rams knew they had a closing window with their current core, and they also knew they needed to start developing Stafford's replacement before that window slammed shut entirely. Simpson was that answer. The plan was for him to spend his rookie year learning the system, holding a clipboard, watching Stafford work. Then, depending on how Stafford held up physically, Simpson would either continue developing as a backup or potentially take over the starting job in 2027 or 2028. The Rams were playing the long game, balancing their immediate championship aspirations with the need to build for the future. Between Rodgers' silence in Pittsburgh and Garoppolo's contemplation in Los Angeles, the quarterback position was generating more headlines after the draft than any of the quarterbacks who were actually selected in it. Fernando Mendoza went first overall to the Raiders. Ty Simpson went 13th to the Rams. In the third round, a few more quarterbacks went off the board after Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson were picked in the first round. The Cardinals took Miami's Carson Beck to open the third round, followed by Penn State QB Drew Aller, getting selected by the Steelers 76th overall. The New York Jets traded up to select Clemson quarterback Cade Klubnik with the 110th overall pick. Beck, like many quarterbacks in this class, was a high-floor, limited-ceiling prospect. He'd been productive at Miami, running an offense that featured quick throws and scheme-generated separation, but his arm strength was merely adequate, and scouts questioned whether he had the physical tools to succeed against elite NFL defenses. The Cardinals, desperate for quarterback help after years of instability at the position, were betting that Beck's intelligence and accuracy would compensate for his physical limitations. Klubnik represented a different archetype entirely. He was undersized but mobile, a dual-threat quarterback who thrived in Clemson's spread system. The Jets, who'd been searching for a franchise quarterback since Joe Namath retired, were hoping Klubnik could develop into a poor man's Russell Wilson, a smaller quarterback whose legs and processing speed allowed him to overcome physical disadvantages. It was a significant gamble, trading up to select a quarterback with obvious physical limitations, but the Jets were desperate enough to take the risk. And yet, the most compelling quarterback storyline of the entire draft weekend was the one involving a 42-year-old man who wouldn't answer his phone. Rodgers dominated the conversation despite not being in Pittsburgh, despite not making any announcements, despite doing nothing except remain silent. That silence had power because of what Rodgers represented. The possibility of immediate championship contention for Pittsburgh if he played, and the possibility of wasted draft capital and another rebuilding year if he didn't. The Rodgers situation put the entire Steelers organization in limbo. They couldn't finalize their offensive playbook without knowing who their quarterback would be. They couldn't structure their passing game around Rodgers' strengths if they didn't know whether he'd be there. They couldn't build chemistry between the quarterback and the receivers during the crucial offseason months when timing routes get developed and trust gets established. Every day that passed without an answer from Rodgers was a day of preparation lost. A day their competitors were gaining an advantage. The uncertainty extended beyond just the football implications. The Steelers had sold Rodgers' potential arrival to their fan base. Season ticket holders had renewed expecting to watch a future Hall of Famer. Sponsors had committed money based on the star power Rodgers would bring. The entire organization had aligned itself around the assumption that Rodgers would play. If he walked away now, the disappointment would be profound, the sense of being used and discarded unavoidable. And yet Rodgers held all the cards. He was a free agent, under no contractual obligation to play for anyone. The Steelers had traded for his rights, but those rights were meaningless if he chose retirement. All the leverage resided with the 42-year-old quarterback who'd spent the spring meditating in darkness and dropping cryptic hints about his future. Pittsburgh could do nothing but wait, prepare contingency plans, and hope that eventually Rodgers would deign to inform them of his decision. The Garoppolo situation lacked the same drama, but carried similar implications for the Rams. Los Angeles had operated all offseason under the assumption that Garoppolo would return as Stafford's backup, providing veteran insurance in case of injury. When Garoppolo started seriously considering retirement, the Rams had to scramble. They'd already drafted Simpson, which provided long-term security, but didn't solve the immediate backup problem. If Stafford got injured in Week 1 and Garoppolo was retired, the Rams would be handing their offense to a rookie who wasn't ready. So the Rams kept the lines of communication open with Garoppolo, trying to convince him to return for one more season. They offered him a lucrative one-year deal. They promised him a minimal workload during camp and preseason. They made every accommodation they could think of to entice him back, but Garoppolo's hesitation wasn't about money or playing time. It was about whether subjecting his body to another year of NFL violence was worth it when he'd already achieved financial security and proven himself as a player. The landscape of the NFL had shifted violently in the span of 72 hours. 4 prominent players retired, removing years of institutional knowledge and on-field production from their respective rosters. Derek Carr walked away from the Saints rather than undergo surgery, leaving New Orleans without a starting quarterback. Drew Dalman retired at 27, despite being a Pro Bowl center with tens of millions still owed on his contract, sending shockwaves through a league that rarely sees players leave in their prime. Terron Armstead chose health over one more season in Miami. Adam Thielen ended his improbable journey from undrafted regional combine invitee to two-time Pro Bowler, closing the book on one of the great underdog stories in NFL history. George Pickens learned that the Cowboys would not commit to him beyond this season, leaving one of the league's most talented and temperamental receivers in limbo with only the franchise tag providing any financial security. The announcement that Dallas had no intention of negotiating a long-term deal was a power play executed on national television, a reminder to Pickens that talent without reliability gets rewarded with hesitation rather than commitment. A.J. Brown's impending departure from Philadelphia was effectively confirmed the moment the Eagles traded up for Mekhi Lemon, and Schefter reported the Patriots as the likely destination. The 3-time All-Pro receiver who'd been central to Philadelphia's offense just months earlier was now being shipped to a rebuilding team in New England. His relationship with the Eagles so fractured that both sides preferred a divorce to attempting reconciliation. The Lemon selection and Greenard trade showed that Philadelphia was retooling rather than rebuilding, swapping out problematic stars for younger, hungrier replacements while maintaining their championship window. Aaron Rodgers continued to hold an entire franchise hostage with his indecision, refusing to commit to playing for the Steelers despite Pittsburgh having traded significant assets to acquire him. The silence from Rodgers forced the Steelers to prepare contingency plans, draft Drew Aller as insurance, and operate their entire offseason program in a state of uncertainty that gave their competitors an advantage. Every day without an answer was a day of preparation lost, a day of chemistry not built, a day of frustration mounting throughout the organization. And Jimmy Garoppolo weighed walking away from the game entirely, forcing the Rams to draft Ty Simpson earlier than they might have otherwise, and creating backup quarterback uncertainty for a team that believed it could compete for a championship if Stafford stayed healthy. 8 announcements, 8 seismic events, all delivered through the megaphone of ESPN's draft coverage where the cameras were already rolling and the audience was already captive. The NFL draft is supposed to be about the future, about young players hearing their names called and beginning their professional journeys, about hope and potential and the promise of what might be. But in 2026, the most dramatic moments belong to the veterans, the ones leaving, the ones being moved, the ones who couldn't decide, and the ones who had already made up their minds but waited until the biggest stage of the offseason to tell the world. Derek Carr choosing health over football. Drew Dalman walking away from millions at 27. Terron Armstead retiring on his own terms. Adam Thielen closing an underdog story for the ages. George Pickens learning he wasn't worth a long-term commitment in Dallas. A.J. Brown being replaced by a first-round pick and shipped to New England. Aaron Rodgers refusing to answer whether he'd play for Pittsburgh. Jimmy Garoppolo contemplating retirement and forcing the Rams' hand in the draft. That's the NFL. The present is always being swallowed by the future. Yesterday's stars become today's trade chips, become tomorrow's retirement announcements. Championship windows open and close with brutal efficiency. Organizations pivot from competing to rebuilding in the span of a single offseason. And sometimes the past doesn't go quietly. Sometimes it makes noise. Sometimes it demands attention. Sometimes it overshadows the future entirely, dominating the conversation during the league's most forward-looking event. The 2026 NFL Draft will be remembered not for Fernando Mendoza going first overall, not for Ty Simpson being selected by the Rams, not for any of the prospects who walked across the stage in Pittsburgh. It will be remembered for the veterans who used that stage, that audience, that moment to reshape the league's landscape. 8 announcements that changed rosters, altered championship odds, and reminded everyone that in the NFL, nothing is permanent except change itself.